Okay, again, good morning. The Temple, the Tears, and the Dream That Never Died is the title of today's class. And you know that when people talk to the wall, they don't expect a response. There's one exception. There's one wall that represents the dreams, the tears that never died, the dream that never died. The Western Wall is referred to, the full name is Kotel Hamaravi, that's translated as the Western Wall. In short, we call it the Kotel, or if you're Ashkenazic, it's the Kaisel. Have you been at the Kaisel today yet? And the question is there any difference between visiting the Kotel and people visiting other historical sites, the Colosseum, the Acropolis, and all the other famous historical sites where people connect to the history of Rome or of Greece or other major centers of life? So it's a rhetorical question. Obviously there's a difference. There's a very big difference. Most people, if not all people who visit those sites, are visiting ancient history. When we go to the Western Wall, we're not visiting history. We're visiting something that's happening right now. It's current, and it's future, not just current, and that's the most important part of it. And so, for us to understand that, I'd like to tell a little story they tell. It's probably apocryphal. Napoleon was once passing a shul on Tisha B'Av, the day in which we observe the mourning for the destruction of the two temples. And he saw people were sitting close to the ground, the lights were dimmed, fewer candles than usual, people were crying, and he wanted to know what was going on, what were they crying about? And when they told him it's about the destruction of the temple, he says, well, when would that happen? Expecting them to say it happened just now. And they said it happened close to 2,000 years ago, 1,800 years ago. And according to this story, he said, if people could still be crying for an event that happened close to 2,000 years ago, then I believe that it will be rebuilt. Now the story is probably not true, but they don't tell those stories about other buildings and about other incidents. The story reflects the reality that the destruction of the temple, yes, it was something that happened close to 2,000 years ago, but it's something that we live with every year, and it's not just living with because it's something that happened in the past, but it's something that is happening in the present, and the change that we anticipate for the future. And it's really not about the wall. It's about the beyond the wall. What do I mean by that? But just share a little anecdote. When my grandson, who just got married, was a little baby, his mother took him to a store called Bed, Bath, and Beyond. And when they came to the cashier, he looks at his mother and he says, I see the beds, I see the baths, but where's the beyond? So whenever we talk about the beyond, I'm reminded of that story. And that's what we're all looking for, the beyond. Most people would hear other people say, and then believe it themselves, that the holiest site in Judaism is the Western Wall. That's not true. The holiest site is where the dome of the rock is, where the temple stood, and with that rock, most people, most historians, and most rabbis believe that that rock was the rock that was situated in the Holy of Holies, the holiest place on earth. That is the holiest site for the Jewish people. So it's not about the wall. We're not happy that there's only a wall there. That wall was the only thing left from after the destruction. We're praying every day, many times a day, for the rebuilding of the temple on that site. So let's talk a little bit about what that building, what that structure represents. Much of Judaism revolves around the Beit HaMikdash. The Hebrew term for the temple is Beit HaMikdash, or Beis HaMikdash if you're Ashkenazic. It also has other names. It's also called Beis HaBchira, the chosen house, the house that God chose. It's also called Beit Olamim, the eternal house. When we look up at Judaism, you ask a modern Jew, what is your knowledge of Judaism in terms of its relationship with the temple? Unfortunately, most people will shrug their shoulders and not know what it is. They'll think of it as, yes, we had a temple 2,000 years ago and it was destroyed. And we commemorate that destruction, that historical event. But the truth is that most of Judaism revolves around the temple. We have 613 commandments in the Torah. About half of those 613 revolve around the Beit HaMikdash, about the Holy Temple. It happens to be Judaism's most holy place. How do we know that Mashiach is going to come? Some great Jewish leader is going to come and say he's the Mashiach. How do we test him? How do we know that he's Mashiach? Well, before he can be tested, he had to accomplish a lot as well. I'm not going to go into that right now. But one of the tests to determine the certainty that he is the Mashiach is that he could tell us the exact site for the temple and build the temple. Once he builds the temple, then you know that he's the Mashiach. Actually, it's that and gathering all the Jews from all parts of the world to the land of Israel. So it's the Beit HaMikdash, the holy temple, that determines that someone is really qualified to be the Mashiach. For 2,000 years, when we pray, the primary prayer called the Amidah, the standing prayer, or the Shemona Esrei, the 18 blessings, we face which direction? Did anyone say east? No, that's not correct, because it depends where you live on the globe. If you live in Australia, you don't face east. You can probably face any direction if you really think about it, because it's the earth is round. Mm-hmm. But we face east because Jerusalem is east of the United States. But it's not just facing Israel. We're facing Jerusalem, and it's not just facing Jerusalem. If you're in Jerusalem, you face the temple site. So all of our prayers converge at the temple. Every prayer that we make is directed towards that temple, even today. For 2,000 years, we've been praying for it to be rebuilt. It's uncanny. It's something mysterious. How could it be that we were driven off the land by the Romans close to 2,000 years ago? We've been wandering from one place to another throughout Europe, North Africa, Asia, and now the United States, and we've never lost that hope. And how could you determine that a Jew is alive and vibrant in his Judaism? It's when they're constantly thinking about the temple in Jerusalem and praying for its rebuilding. 4 days a year we fast. Tisha B'Av is the ultimate day of fasting, which commemorates the destruction of the two temples, but there are other fast days that are all related to the destruction of the temple. When we get married, after the chuppah, after the ceremony, what do? We break a glass. Why do we break the glass? Because we're remembering the destruction of the temple. And we're saying that our joy, as great as the joy of a wedding, it's the greatest joy that there is in Jewish life, as great as that joy is, it's incomplete because we don't have the temple yet. And we're praying and hoping that our joy will become complete with the rebuilding of the temple. Now, it's not just the Jewish people who think about the temple. It's the whole world. The obsession of the whole world is with Israel, but not just Israel, but mostly because of Jerusalem, and mostly because of the Temple Mount. If you look at all the terrorists, and they'll tell you that it's not about land. It's about what they call the mosque that they build to replace the temple, which is their custom. Whenever they conquer someplace, they get rid of the holy shrines of the people who live there, and they build their own mosques over it. They're fighting about that. If we would have a peace agreement, we'll give them all of Israel, all of Jerusalem. We just want to keep the Temple Mount. They won't agree to it. They'll first agree to keeping the Temple Mount and giving everything else. They won't agree to that either, but that would be secondary. It's the most contested piece of real estate in the world. Is anyone here in the news about people contesting real estate in any other country, it certainly doesn't get to headlines. There might be many people contesting different pieces of land, but it doesn't get to headlines. It has to be with Israel, only Israel. Israel is involved in a war where you have certain number of casualties, civilian casualties, which are unavoidable. And yet there are tens of thousands of casualties going on all over the world. It doesn't even get to the newspapers. Nobody knows about it. No one cares about it. No one knows about it. It's only because it's Israel, only because it's related to the Jewish people and Israel and the temple. When King David wanted to build the temple, he purchased that area and he paid full price. He had every right to claim it. He's the king. He owned everything. But he decided, I'm going to pay full price for it. That's a similar thing that happened with Abraham. When Abraham purchased a burial plot for his wife Sarah, he insisted on paying the full value. And where is that? That's in Hebron. Jacob conquered the city of Shechem, which they now call Nablus, and he paid the full price. Those are the three most contested areas in the world. Why do they pay full price? Well, it shouldn't be contested. And it didn't help. So now, why now more than ever? Why do I believe that the contesting of the ownership of that land, the entire controversy surrounding the Temple Mount, why is it now stronger than ever before? And I'm convinced that it's because we're so close to the Messianic age. We're so close to Mashiach coming and rebuilding that temple, so the forces of evil are getting very nervous and getting very agitated about that, the possibility of them finally having to relinquish their rights to that location. Let's go a little bit of history about the temples. How many temples were there in Jewish history? I'm talking about not temples as in synagogues. I'm talking about temples as in the lone center of Jewish life, of Jewish spiritual life that existed since the beginning of the Jewish nation that occurred after the Exodus from Egypt. So we have temples in 6 different locations and 7 different structures. That means one of the temples was moved from one place to another. So it moved into 7 different structures in 6 locations. The first thing was the Mishkan. Mishkan is translated as tabernacle. Most people would know the word Mishkan more than they would know the word tabernacle. But the Mishkan was a portable sanctuary that they built in the desert. That happened after the debacle with the golden calf, and God was angry at the people, and Moses procured atonement for them. God says to Moses, tell the people to build a sanctuary for me. That was the Mishkan. It was made out of boards with covering of skins, animal skins and other fabric. It was a portable structure that they would dismantle whenever they would move from one place to another in the desert. They would dismantle it and reconstitute it. That lasted for about close to 40 years in the desert. And then when they crossed the Jordan and they started to conquer the land, it took them 7 years of conquest, 7 years of dividing the land. For those 14 years, the Mishkan stayed with them in a place called Gilgal. Then, when they became a little bit more permanent, the people were now more in control of the land, they built a semi-permanent structure in the city of Shiloh, which they anglicized to read Shiloh. I always say this, I never understood why you have to change the sounding of a word. Shiloh is just as easy to pronounce as Shiloh, but it's Shiloh, not Shiloh. Shiloh is a city in the center of the land of Israel, the part that belonged to the tribe of Joseph. And that structure was made out of stone, but the covering was the same covering as the Mishkan. It was made out of fabric. So that lasted for 369 years. When that was destroyed by the Philistines, they built, and it's not clear what exactly they built, but it seems from an analysis of Maimonides' writings that they built the same kind of temple as they did in Shiloh in a city called Nov, and then in Givon. Nov was destroyed and Givon was the replacement, and that lasted for 57 years. Then King David purchased the land that we now have the site of the temple, but he did not build the temple. God says you cannot build it because your hands were filled with blood. You had to fight bloody wars. Your son Solomon will build the temple. When it was built, the first temple lasted for 410 years, followed by 70 years exile, and then the second temple was built and lasted for 420 years in the same site as the first temple. The fact that the temples changed from portable, temporary dwellings to permanent is a reflection of the status of the Jewish people. When the Jewish people became more and more settled, God became more settled, as it were, within the Jewish community. Yes?
And the first temple that lasted 410 years, what was the fate of it?
It was destroyed by the Babylonians.
So they didn't use it for themselves, they just destroyed it.
They just destroyed it. They massacred the people, the priests, thousands of priests were massacred. It was not just the destruction of a building, it was a major, major Holocaust. I don't know the numbers of the first temple, but they say for the second temple, the Romans murdered up to 2 million Jews. So it was the largest destruction of Jewish life until the Holocaust, 1800 years later. Now, what was the actual functioning of the temple? What did they do in the temple? So they did sacrifices. There were two kinds of sacrifices, communal sacrifices and individual sacrifices. It was also the place where Jews would go on pilgrimages 3 times a year in the 3 joyous holidays, Passover, Shavuos, and Sukkos. Jews from all over Israel would flock to Jerusalem and celebrate in the capital and bring special sacrifices there as well. And it was also the seat of the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin was the Jewish Supreme Court consisting of 71 judges. These were the greatest minds in the Jewish community. They were situated in the temple. That was their residence. That's where they convened, and that's where Jewish law emerged. As it says, Ki mitzion teitze Torah, from Zion Torah will emerge. What does that mean? It means literally Torah knowledge would emerge from Zion. Zion is a metaphor, is a word used to describe sometimes the Jewish people or Jerusalem or the temple itself. Now, where do we get the idea that you're supposed to build a temple? It's based on in Exodus, where God tells Moses to tell the people, "V'asu li migdash, make for me a sanctuary, v'shachanti betocham, and I will dwell within them." So God commanded Moses to build a temple. And that, Maimonides writes, was not just a one-time thing, but that continued, and that's when they built the other temples, the other sanctuaries, the more permanent ones. And that commandment is there today as well. We still have a commandment, it's one of the 613, to build a temple. So why aren't we doing it? So there are many reasons. Political considerations are part of it, that we don't have the ability politically and maybe even militarily to defend the building of the temple, because that would require eliminating the other structures that are there right now. But that's not the main reason why we don't build the temple. The main reasons are halachic. There are legal impediments for building the temple. Just to mention one of them, and this is controversial, I'm not going to go into the details, this can take a few lectures in and of itself. According to Jewish law, the altar of the temple had to be situated in a precise place. It can't be an inch away from where the temple originally was built. So in order to know the exact precise place, that's elusive. That's something that we don't have the measurements exactly. Some people claim we do have the exact measurements, but that's controversial. When they built the second temple, they only knew where to build the altar because there was a prophet. There were 3 prophets who entered Israel with the Jewish people. That was the end of the era of prophecy. And one of the prophets testified exactly where the dimensions of the altar and where it should be situated. We don't have that ability. And there are other considerations as well. So we can't physically build a temple. So how do we fulfill the obligation of building a temple if we can't physically build it? So one answer is there's a midrash that says when the prophet Heschel, Ezekiel, who was exiled into Babylonia, when he got a prophecy from God to teach the people about how to build the temple. And he has all the details of the building of the ultimate future temple. And he says to God, "God, the temple is in ruins and you're telling me to teach the people how to build a temple?" And God says yes, because by learning about it, it's as if you're doing it itself. Learning, that's the incredible thing about the study of Torah. When you're studying Torah, because it's divine wisdom, let's say you're studying the Torah concerning the holiday of Rosh Hashanah. then it's Rosh Hashanah for you that day. If you're studying about Passover, it's Passover. Yesterday we read in the Torah a section that dealt with all the major holidays. So we were actually celebrating all the holidays, because when you study Torah about any subject, you are as if you are fulfilling that subject. Torah transcends time and space. So when you study the laws of the temple, which what we're doing now, it's as if we're fulfilling the mitzvah of building the temple. We are connecting to the knowledge of the temple as it is transmitted through the Torah, and it's as if we are now actually building the temple. That's one way. According to the Zohar, another way is by building a synagogue. Because when the Jews were exiled into Babylonia, God told them that you should build small sanctuaries, small temples, little models of the main temple. So every synagogue is like a model of the temple. So when you build a synagogue or support a synagogue, you are fulfilling the mitzvah of building the Beis HaMikdash. But then there's a third way, and the third way is based on a question that is asked on the original verse. It says, "You shall make for me a sanctuary, and I will dwell in them." So the question is, it should have said, "I will dwell in it." And the answer is no. It means in them, that God dwells in each and every one of us. If we create a sanctuary in our own hearts, in our own souls, God will dwell in them, in all of us. So we can build the temple spiritually when we make ourselves receptive to God and receptive to God's teachings. So those are the ways we fulfill the mitzvah today, but it's only a substitute. And we are not satisfied with fulfilling the mitzvah spiritually or by building synagogues or by studying the laws. It's not enough. We want, and we keep on praying for the ultimate rebuilding of the temple with the coming of Mashiach. But why is it so central to Judaism? Having established that it's not just one aspect of Judaism, but it's so central that hundreds of mitzvahs are associated with it, why is it so central? Why are we so obsessed with it? Don't we already have synagogues? Right here, you're in this room. This is a synagogue. This is a place where we serve God. This is a place where we study Torah. It has all the benefits of the temple. We can't bring sacrifices, but we can bring spiritual sacrifices. So why is it so central to Judaism? And why does it have to be built in that place? That's a controversial place. Let's move it to Tel Aviv. That's also controversial. There's no non-controversial place in the world, we'll soon discover, especially for Jews. So let's talk a little bit about where the temple was built. It was built on a place called Har HaMoriah, Mount Moriah. What is it about? What does the name Moriah mean? There are different interpretations what it means. One interpretation is that it comes from a word which means instruction. That's the source of teachings of how to live our lives, because that's where the Sanhedrin resided, and they, the ones who disseminated Jewish observance and Jewish law to the whole world. So it's Moriah is the same root as the word Torah, actually, or Hara'ah, teaching, instruction. Some say that it's related to the word Yira, fear, that this is the place, or awe, that generates awe for God, or respect and reverence for the Jewish people. That the nations of the world know that this is our strength, and that's why they try to attack us there, because they know that this is our strength, and this is what overwhelms them, and this is what causes them to have fear. But it's where did the world start? When God created the world, He had to start at a certain point, and that certain point is the Temple Mount. And in the Temple Mount itself, it's the stone that I mentioned before, in the Holy of Holies, that's called Even Shetia, the foundation stone. That was the place from which the entire world emerged, the entire universe emerged from that one place. What that means physically, I can't tell you, but that means spiritually is that's the center of the universe. The center of the universe is Israel, and within Israel itself is Jerusalem. Within Jerusalem, it's the Temple Mount. Within the Temple Mount, it's that stone that is situated in the Holy of Holies. So that's points to something, that the temple is a structure that fulfills the purpose for which the world was created, as we'll soon discuss. The Midrash tells us when God created Adam, he took him from the earth. He formed him from the earth. That's why he's called Adam. Adam is cognate to the word Adamah, earth. Which earth did he use? He used the earth upon which later on the altar would be built and situated, which is understood to mean that God created humanity from a place that allows for him to be rehabilitated, for him to repent, for him to change, for him to transform. That built into humanity is the power not just to make mistakes. When people make mistakes, they say we're only human, but they forget that being human is about correcting those mistakes. If you just rely on the fact that you make mistakes, I'm human, I can always make mistakes. If you rely on that, you're only half human. The other part of humanity is the ability to correct your mistakes, to rehabilitate. And that's where Adam was created, to indicate the power of humanity to change in a positive way. When Adam, when Cain and Abel, and then Noah, after the flood, offered sacrifices, where did they offer it? So we have an oral tradition that was there on that side of the temple, on Har HaMoriah. When Abraham, that's based on an oral tradition, but when Abraham brought Isaac as a sacrifice, which was the ultimate test to see if he was that faithful to God, where was it? It says clearly in the Torah, it was Eretz HaMoriah, Har HaMoriah, Mount Moriah. So we know that that's where the Akedah, that's where the ultimate test of faith in God was passed by Abraham and Isaac, and that's where the temple was ultimately built. Jacob had a dream, and in the dream he sees a ladder on the ground reaching up to the heavens, angels going up and angels coming down. That ladder is what connects heaven to earth. Where was that ladder? Where was this dream? This was in the site of the temple in Har HaMoriah. Then there's a midrash that says something very powerful, that where is Mount Sinai? So there's a lot of controversy where Mount Sinai really is. The people believe that it's in some Sinai desert, and they seem to point to it. There's, I think, a mosque, a church there. And then some people say it's in Saudi Arabia. But there's another, that according to this midrash, there is no such place called Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai is Har HaMoriah, which was transported to the desert, and that's where God gave the Torah and brought back to its location. So that's why in Judaism, there's no emphasis on finding Mount Sinai. You would think, isn't that the most important mountain in the world? Because that's where God gave us the Torah. That's the ultimate purpose in creation, and everything revolves around the Torah and its commandments. But there is no desire in Judaism to locate Har Sinai. Why? Because Har HaMoriah, however we understand that midrash, if it's physical or it's spiritual, Har HaMoriah, the Temple Mount, that's where the Torah is now given to us. The Torah goes through Har HaMoriah. Not just the Torah, but our prayers as well. So everything in Judaism channels through that mountain and that location. There's a folk tale which doesn't have any Jewish source. The only source they found, I think, was an Arab source, but it's a nice folk tale, that there were two brothers. One was very poor, but he had a nice family. The other one was very rich, but he had no children. So one day the poor one says to himself, you know what? I don't need all my grain, because I have a family that, I can be happy with less. My brother doesn't have a family, and he probably is very depressed, so I'm going to bring him some grain. The rich brother, meanwhile, said, I don't need all this grain. I'm rich, I have no big family. My brother is poor, I'm going to bring him the grain. So they both at the same time think of bringing the grain, and where do they meet? On top of the hill. And they embraced each other when they realized the love they had for each other. So it's the source of love in this world. It's a nice, beautiful story. Wherever the source is, there's an expression in Jewish sources, accept the truth from wherever it comes. So what exactly is the function of the temple? God is all over, obviously. God is omnipresent. So what was the function of the temple in relation to bringing God to the world? So the Tanya, the classic work of Hasidus, says that it's just like the soul in relation to the body. The soul is in every part of the body. If the soul wouldn't be in my toes wouldn't function. But every part of my body is animated through the part of the soul that's in my brain. The brain controls the whole body. And that's where the soul manifests itself more distinctly, more prominently. The same thing is true with the world. God is the soul of the whole universe. So God is in everything. God is in every little pebble, every grain of sand, in every molecule, in every atom. But where does God's presence, how does it reach every aspect of creation? It's through the brain. The brain is the temple. The temple situated in Jerusalem, and even now where the temple is destroyed, the holiness didn't depart from that area. That's why there are some restrictions of going on the Temple Mount. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about it later, about those restrictions. But that's the brain. That's the nerve center of the universe. The whole universe gets its sustenance, its energy, its life from the brain, the temple, where God's presence is concentrated in a much more potent way. There's a midrash that says, if the nations of the world would only know how much energy they get, how much life they receive from the temple, not only would they not have destroyed it, they would have surrounded it with legions of soldiers to protect it. And I like to quip that if they all recognize that, who are they protecting it from? And my answer is from us. Because we as Jews don't fully appreciate what we have. If we had fully appreciated what we have, we wouldn't be in the predicament that we're in. So you need protection from us, that we should value the temple. If they knew the value, they would really, instead of destroying it, they would protect it. Because the temple is the source of their existence. They get their energy from the temple, and maybe that's why they have such a strong obsession with taking it away from us, that we shouldn't have it, because they want all the energy for themselves. Another aspect of the temple, now all these different aspects are all interconnected. Another one is that the purpose of the temple was to manifest God's presence in the world. And that's where God's presence is revealed, because God is all over. Someone once asked, great Rabbi, could you tell me where God is? And he answered, could you tell me where God isn't? And then another rabbi was once asked the same question, where is God? And his answer is, wherever you let him in. And they're both right. Because God, while God is in everything, there's no place in which God's presence is not there. But if you want to feel God's presence, you have to invite him in. You can't just rely that it's going to happen automatically. The closest it came to happening automatically, not quite totally that way, was the temple. When a person entered into the temple, you felt God's presence. Although God never takes away free choice, a person could say, you know what, I'm going to go to the temple and I'm not going to feel anything. I'm going to resist whatever spiritual energy is there. I am going to make myself impervious to that. I'm going to make myself resistant. We have that ability. We have free choice. But if you don't work hard against the temple, being in that temple site itself would energize you with a spiritual awareness of God's presence in ways that no other place on earth could do. That's why Abraham, how does he name Mount Moriah after the story with the binding of Isaac? He says, God will be seen. This is the place where God could be seen. Of course, it doesn't mean physically seeing with your eyes, but it means being aware of his presence to the same extent as you would be aware of someone's presence that you could see. There's no stronger way of proving something's existence than by sight. Seeing is believing. Well, that's how strong your observance of God's presence and your awareness of his presence would be in the temple. And that's what the 3 pilgrimage holidays were all about. Why do they have 3 holidays a year? Because when Jews were away from the temple, the effects of the temple would wear off. So the Torah decided that you need to have a refill 3 times a year. You have to get recharged 3 times a year, and that would help you until the next holiday. Another way, well, in what way did people see God's presence? One of the ways was through the miracles that happened in the temple. In Ethics of the Fathers, it delineates 10 different miracles that happened regularly in the temple. One of the miracles that is mentioned, the last one I believe, is that when people would come to the temple, they would be squeezed in there like sardines. In fact, I once overheard sardines talking, and they said, it's so crowded in here, it's like in the temple. That's where crowdedness came from. And even though it was so crowded, you had not an inch to spare. When it came time for people to prostrate, to bow down, there was enough room for everyone. That was one of the 10 miracles that occurred in the temple, and 9 others. But that's not all the miracles that were there. There was another miracle which perhaps is the greatest miracle, and that is that the ark, which was situated in the first temple. The second temple did not have the ark. The ark, the Torah describes as having certain dimensions, 2.5 cubits by 1.5 by 1.5. It had to be precise. If it was a millimeter off, it would not be kosher. And yet, the ark did not occupy any space. If you measure the space in the temple, the ark didn't register. It had to be made of actual wood and gold, and it had to have space. It was part of the physical world, and yet at the same time it was not part of the physical world. And that was a miracle that occurred, and the people were able to see it. Well, I guess they couldn't see it because they didn't have entry to the Holy of Holies, but when they did bring the ark into the Holy of Holies, they saw how, and also when they needed to make repairs, they were able to see it. Another miracle was the menorah. We all know the miracle of Hanukkah, where a little bit of oil lasted for 8 days instead of 1. But that miracle happened every day in the temple, in the first temple, and a little bit of the second temple era, where one of the 7 branches of the menorah, called the western lamp, would last forever. It would never extinguish. They would have to extinguish it in order to fulfill the mitzvah of lighting it. So these are some of the miracles that happen, and through these miracles, people became aware of God's presence. Nowadays, if these miracles would happen, we'd say the guy's a magician. There's some sleight of hand. It's a trick. So people ask, why doesn't God perform the same miracles that he performed in biblical times? And the answer is because nobody would accept them. People would rationalize them. We're so prone to rationalization of everything, miracles won't impress us. But miracles do happen, like what happened in Iran, where Israel was able to fly undetected over the whole country and do what it had to do to destroy the nuclear capabilities. So that's just one of the miracles. The Jewish people are the greatest miracle. The fact that we're here today, when you see the antisemitism is coming from every direction. People used to say, well, it's the Nazis are the anti-Semites on the extreme right, and now we're seeing it on the extreme left, and on the right, and on the center. It's coming from every direction. So the fact that we're still here and still strong is one of the greatest miracles. But in the temple you saw physical miracles, and that was what gave people this awareness of God's presence. But it goes deeper than that. It wasn't just seeing miracles and seeing God's presence. The temple was ultimately the structure that was the prototype, the model for all of creation. What is the purpose of creation? We've discussed this many times. Why did God create this universe? What did he need a universe? We can't really know why God wants anything, because God is God, and God transcends logic and reason. But he had to have a purpose. If you see someone building a structure, you see a construction company coming and building a building, you're going to go over to them and say, what is this building for? Says, we have no idea. Why are you building it? We have no idea. Can we speak to the person who designed this? Yeah. Why are you building this building? I have no idea. We're just building it. It doesn't make any sense. If you want to be rational, you have to believe that if someone who builds something has a purpose. What is the purpose of creating this universe? Why did God need this universe? He didn't need it. He wanted it. But why? And the answer is he wanted to create a world, a physical world, which is the lowest of all realms, because there are spiritual realms, and it's a world where there's a lot of evil, a world with a lot of temptation, a lot of challenges, a lot of tests, and he wanted us to create a dwelling for him in this world, to make his presence felt by the inhabitants of this world. And he accomplishes that by creating human beings who are not programmed beings, unlike angels that are programmed, unlike animals that are programmed. We are not programmed. We could choose good or evil, and in the end we will choose enough good to make this world a divine dwelling place, a palace for God, that God should feel comfortable. That we open our homes, we invite in guests, we want it to be comfortable for the guests. Well, God wants to be comfortable in this home, which he calls the world. And that was what the temple was all about. The temple was the model, the prototype of a physical structure. It had to be physical, but that was the place in which God's presence was felt. And by extension, we have to create this temple throughout the whole world. There's a biblical book called The Song of Songs. It's a love song. It's a collection of love songs. It's a very romantic, very erotic love songs. And it's understood that it's the reason why it's part of the Bible. And Rabbi Akiva said, well, the rest of the Bible is holy. This is the Holy of Holies, because it represents the relationship between God and the Jewish people, the love affair between God and Israel. And in that book, there's a verse that says, where God speaks, and he says, I have come to my garden, my sister the bride. And the Midrash explains what this means is that when God created the world was created as a garden, as a luscious, delightful place. Unlike those who believe the world was initially evil, we believe the world was initially good and holy and positive. That positivity is the essence of everything, the essence of humanity, the essence of everything. Evil was superimposed on the positivity. But when Adam committed the sin of eating of the forbidden fruit, the Shekhinah, the divine presence, withdrew, so to speak, to the first of the seven heavens. When Cain killed Abel, it withdrew to the second of the seven heavens. And then he goes on listing different generational sins, total of 7, where the divine presence withdrew to the 7th heaven, which means as distant as it can be. What that means is that God's presence was so concealed that it was impossible to find ways of connecting to it. And then what happened when God tells the Jewish people to build a sanctuary? I skipped the 7 generations. Abraham comes along, and Abraham's righteousness brought the divine presence down a notch. Isaac another notch, Jacob a third notch, and it goes through 7 generations, the 7th being Moses, and all 7s are beloved, brought the divine presence down to earth. That's through giving the Torah at Mount Sinai, but what concretized it, that was the building of the Mishkan, of the portable sanctuary. And that's the whole idea. The whole idea of the portable sanctuary is to bring the divine presence in its full manifestation, not just partial, but God should be fully revealed in this physical world. And that's what the temple was. The temple was one place where that dream of God, that aspiration of God was fulfilled. And it's a model for us wherever we are to replicate that. Another aspect of the temple, we're living in a world, the world is referred to by our sages as Alma de Shikra. It's Aramaic for a false world. When you say it's a false world, does that mean that every one of us here is a liar, is a pathological liar? No, it doesn't mean that we have to be liars, but we don't see reality the way it is. And it manifests itself in devious ways of various people. We don't see truth, and it's very hard to look at a person and say, everything you say is true, everything you say is consistent. Truth is not just the opposite of a lie. Truth in the Talmud is defined as something that is consistent from the beginning through the middle to the end. That's why the Hebrew word for truth is emet, which consists of the first, middle, and last letter of the Hebrew alphabet. So God is the only true existence that is totally consistent. And we are basically inconsistent human beings. Hypocrisy is the worst form of inconsistency, but doesn't mean that every time you're inconsistent, you're a hypocrite. Every hypocrite is inconsistent. And it makes us lose faith in humanity. We lose faith because we see how people, even if they're not pathological liars, they're inconsistent, they're fickle, they don't maintain any level of goodness. They're constantly going up and down. If you could see truth with your own eyes, if you could see someone that's 100% truthful in the sense, not just not lying, but someone who's so totally consistent, the Midrash says that when you see truth, you have to bow for it. And that's what you saw in the temple. When you went into the temple, you were able to shed all your inconsistencies. You were able to see truth in its purest form. And that's a place of perfection. That's why this is a long discussion in its own right. In the temple, if you were blemished, You couldn't serve as a Kohen, as a priest in the temple, if you had handicaps. So one would think, well, that's discriminating against handicapped people. But one of the reasons for it is that in the temple, everything had to be perfect. Everything had to be consistent. Your inner beauty, your inner integrity had to be matched by the outer. The one was a mirror image of the other. The temple was a place where you had ultimate consistency.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
you take that position, no blemish. How can a man come in who is circumcised?
That's called unblemished. That when God tells Abraham to circumcise himself, he says, you're now imperfect. If you circumcise yourself, you'll become perfect. You'll be tamim, whole. That the foreskin is an imperfection that God built into the human body. But your question was asked by Roman officials of Rabbi Akiva. If God created you that way, why are you starting up with God's creation? But it's the opposite. It's an imperfection that God created deliberately so we can become perfect, that we can perfect ourselves, relatively speaking. Of course, we're never perfect. So getting back to the point, when you came to the temple, you couldn't really relate to evil, because evil is the ultimate imperfection, the ultimate inconsistency, the ultimate lie. Evil is a concealment of truth, of reality. God is real. The commandments of the Torah are real. The soul is real. And you're living a life of not being real. So you came into the temple, it changed momentarily. It doesn't mean that when you left you remained that way, but it had an effect for a long time. The only thing I could compare it to, when we were students and we had an opportunity once a year to have a private audience with the Rabbi, we spent 2 or more weeks preparing for that. Spiritual preparation, meditation, being more conscientious and doing everything, studying better. And then after being with the Rebbe for 2 minutes, that's all it took. You were a changed person. It lasted about 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, you went back to being your old self. In some ways, you changed a little bit if you were lucky. But the same thing happened in the temple. When you were in the temple, you were a changed person. You came face to face with truth. Now, in addition to being the source of truth, it was also the source of unity, peace, and love. King Solomon built the temple. Why not King David? I mentioned before, because God says, look, you had to fight wars. God wasn't blaming him for fighting those wars. Those were wars that were necessary. But nevertheless, God says, I can't have a temple which symbolizes peace built by a man who had to violate that peace by fighting wars. It'll be built by your son, whose name will be Shlomo. Shlomo, the root of that word is peace, Shalom. It'll be built by a man who will experience peace, and he represents and personifies peace. Now, why is the temple a place of peace? Because the ultimate peace is when there's peace between God and the world. All other forms of strife in this world will be eliminated if God's presence in this world be fully revealed. When there's a total union, a fusion of the heavenly and the earthly, when that happens, which is what happened in the temple, then there would naturally be peace between nations, between one person and another. That's why I mentioned the miracle that when people would bow, there was enough room for everyone. The temple represented a place where the spirituality was so powerful that nobody conflicted with anyone else. In society, we know how people conflict. People are competitive. People have rivalries. People, even if they get along, they're a little bit suspicious of the other. What are the other's intentions? You always build up a certain defense that you shouldn't allow others to take advantage of you because you feel that they may take advantage of you. That's human nature, and that's not good. But that's human nature. And when you came to the temple, you felt the unity of God and the world so strongly that it created a unity between you and anyone else. So you can bow, the other person can bow, you're sardines, and you love the pressure, you love the tension. It's not a conflict. So that's why when a person entered the temple, you felt this love this intimacy and romance between you and God. And that manifested itself in love for one's fellow. Again, the temple did not take away a person's free choice. You could be living in the temple, you could be in the Holy of Holies. I love music. You could be in the Holy of Holies, and you could still take out a knife and stab someone. In fact, the Talmud tells stories of and this is the interesting thing, there were Kohanim were rushing up the altar to be the first one to bring an offering. And one guy said, you can't be the first guy, and he pushed the other one off and he broke a leg. So you could be in the temple, you could behave in an inhumane way. That's possible because God never takes away free choice from us. But if you didn't allow your free choice to corrupt you, you didn't insist on doing something wrong, then you would feel this love naturally between you and everyone else. And this is an incredible thing. This is a place where truth and peace can coexist. There's an interesting midrash. When God wanted to create the world, he consulted with the angels. And the angel who represents truth said, the angel that was represented kindness said, create the world, because humans will be kind. And then truth said, no, don't create the world, humans we're talking about, because humans are not emes, they're not truthful. Then another angel said, but create the world because humans have tzedek, they have righteousness. And the peace said, no, don't create humans because they don't have any peace. They don't get along with each other. So what did God do? God took truth and he threw it down and he overruled it and he created humanity. So the question was asked, but still peace opposed creation of man. It doesn't say he threw peace down on the ground to get rid of it, to overrule it. And one Hasidic master once said, if you get rid of truth, then there won't be any peace. The only way there can be peace, if you get rid of truth, you will have peace. Because the only reason you don't have peace is because everyone lies. They call those people diplomats. What is a diplomat? He makes peace by lying. When you want to get married and you go to a shadchan, a matchmaker, what does the matchmaker do? He lies about the person. He says how wonderful this guy is, how wonderful this girl is. There's a famous quip that the word for matchmaker in Hebrew is shadchan. Shadchan is an acronym. Sheker, dover, kesef, notel. He speaks falsehood, but he takes money for it. He charges for it. In other words, that's an extreme example. In other words, if people would be honest and they would know exactly what's in the other person's heart, there would be no peace. We're able to cover up if I have a negative feeling about someone, I'm not going to share it with anyone. You won't know about it, so you'll be my friend. But if I would tell you the truth, I really think you're a creep, but I still like you. You're not going to have many friends. So truth and peace don't always get along. In the temple, they coexisted because ultimate truth is consistent with ultimate peace. Because when you have ultimate peace between God and the world, then there's ultimate peace between you and everyone else. When you have ultimate truth and you know the reality of everything, you see the innate good in everyone, then you will have truth, peace as well. The Torah tells us that Aaron, Moses' brother, was loved by everyone. Why did they love him? Because he always made peace between people. How did he make peace? By lying. He would go over to one person and say, your enemy, your erstwhile enemy, told me how he's sorry that he got started up with you and he really thinks you're great and you're wonderful and he really want to make up with you. And then he would run to the other guy and tell him the same fairy tale, or Baba Maisa in Yiddish, and they would get together and they would be good friends. Now that sounds like he had to lie, a white lie, to get them together. But the truth is he wasn't lying, because he realized that deep down they were friends. The fact that they were enemies was a cover to their true feelings. Because if they really hated each other deep down, that ruse wouldn't work. It only worked because they were really friends. So his way of making peace was consistent with truth, with an inner truth. So that's what you had in the temple. In the temple, you felt this feeling of peace and in truth and peace at the same time. Another thing about it was a source of atonement and rehabilitation. Adam was created from the place where the altar would ultimately be built. As I said before, that's to tell us that rehabilitation, atonement, repentance does work. You could change. There are those people who are very pessimistic about the human condition and say you can change. People who are bad people will always remain bad. People who are good people you can trust will always remain good, or maybe not so much as the people who are bad. There's more consistency, people will argue. But that's not true. The Torah tells us that humanity was built with the capacity to change. And no matter how far removed someone is from the truth, so far removed they are from changing, they still can change. And that's why the Rabbi once explained, when Pharaoh's heart was hardened, so how could he be blamed if God hardens his heart? So the Rebbe says, even if God hardens your heart, there's always a spark left in you that if you take advantage of it, you could break out of your mold. Even if God put you in that mold. Humanity has the power of rehabilitation, of saving yourself, because you have a spark of the divine in you. And sometimes that spark is close to the surface, and sometimes it's not. But when you came to the temple ignited that spark. And that's the whole purpose. That's what the sacrifices were all about. But we have to leave that for another time to discuss the sacrifices. Any questions? So many questions?
Did they prostrate themselves if we don't no longer prostrate ourselves like Muslims?
We do. On Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we do prostrate ourselves. There's nothing wrong with prostration, except we're not in the presence of such a holy place that requires that extreme way of showing humility and submission. The holier the place is, the more submission you have to demonstrate. That's why it says in the Talmud that when a Kohen, Gadol, the high priest would pray, he would have to bow more frequently than we do in our prayers. We do bow 4 times, not prostrate, but we bow 4 times in the prayers. The Kohen Gadol would have to bow in the beginning of every prayer, at the end of every prayer. The king would have to be bowed the whole prayer. The higher you are, the more you have to be able to submit yourself and to prostrate yourself. Yes?
The Rabbi, and the explanation that you gave in regard to what the Rebbe said with Pharaoh,
Yeah.
that in that story that you described, the Rebbe seemed to be saying that the free will that God endowed us with, God would allow to overrule whatever he's done.
Yeah.
That's the implication.
Yeah, God says, I'm making you act one way, but you have the power to overcome that.
So God, in his humility, has allowed us to have free will that overrules his decision.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's
I
right.
wanted to confirm that.
It's unlikely.
I will remind you of that on Tuesday.
Okay, if I have to bet on Pharaoh changing, I probably would bet that he's not going to change. If I was a betting person.
We have free will to overcome.
I know, I believe that, but still, if I had to bet on it, my human way of thinking would tell me not to bet too much.
You're a human.
I am. I think so. The last time I checked, yes.
So, I don't know how many people have seen pictures of the Western Wall from, let's say, 1900, but there was no prayer. I'm not sure when the last time the Jews were allowed to pray, but certainly
Before 48.
My grandfather used to go to the Kotel. I don't think you could have 3 people standing together perpendicular to the wall, because it was just very, very narrow.
Yeah.
And there was no separation, there was no mechitza there, and prayer was, you could not pray. There was no tefillah to the Kotel, and they weren't allowed to blow the shofar either. Every once in a while somebody would sneak and do it. But it's interesting to see the pictures of this, it's not even an alley. that existed was the Kotel. The other thing is, do we know when the last time the Jews were allowed to pray at the Kotel?
I think up until 48.
Well, but there was no, you could stand there and have individual.
There were no minyanim. There was no minyan. I don't know.
So there was no minyan.
I don't know if there ever was until 67. I don't
The
know.
other thing, it's I think that the halacha is that a Jew cannot enter the site of the temple, the Makom of the Beit HaMikdash, right?
Right. You can't enter the temple site, right. But that's a separate topic.
I mean, I was inside Al-Aqsa.
But as I understand, Al-Aqsa is really not the site of the temple. It's the other mosque that is.